Okay, so I'm going to be examining a video called Strangest Things Jesus Did. And basically, what this video is about is Jesus doing very harmful, not nice things. And I'm going to examine the video and give my thoughts and the reasons why I think this video is wrong and takes some things out of context. The video is kind of loud on here. I guess it's the software I'm using, so you might want to turn it down a little bit. But here we go.
Things Jesus did. Most historical scholars agree that Jesus Christ existed. Whether or not he was the Son of God and was capable of hosting awesome dinner parties on a super low budget, we may never know. But there is evidence to suggest that a significant number of J-Dog's actions described in the Bible had some basis in reality. These events may have been exaggerated, and they've certainly been eulogized over, but some might actually have taken place. And if that's true, then I wonder if any of the following stories were real as we investigate some of the strangest things Jesus did.
Gotta give the right credit. I do like the intros to these videos.
Number 5. Promoted self-harm to children. In Matthew 18, Jesus calls a little kid to his side and begins to make a point about being as humble as children. But things took a dark turn when he suggests that anyone who dissuades a child from believing in him should be thrown into the sea with a millstone around their neck. And it gets worse. During a diatribe about the evils of sin, Jesus states, while standing next to the child, that if part of your body causes you to sin, you should remove it. Stolen a bag of coins with your right hand? Chop it off. Coveted thy neighbor's ox with your eyes? Gouge them out. Jesus says it would be better to live your life maimed than to be cast into the fires of eternal hell with 2 hands and 2 feet. And you know what? I'm not going to argue with that. But this speech is a little beyond PG considering your audience, pal. What if this poor little kid had just, discovered himself that morning? He'd have gone home and, bye-bye sin limbs. I guess that's where all the eunuchs came from. Number 4. He went on a whipping.
Okay, so promoting self-harm to children. Jesus spoke in a lot of metaphors. That's just something he liked to do. In fact, in the same chapter, there's several parables he spoke in. Jesus used parables to speak to people a lot, which were stories, metaphorical stories. Now, when Jesus said, gouge your eyes out and cut your hand off, yeah, that does sound pretty gruesome. But what he was making the comparison at is how horrible hell is. What he meant by cut it off or gouge it out was, if you have something that's in your life, say a certain something you do, let's just say a movie you watch or a certain type of songs you listen to, and they cause you to sin in some way. Or maybe there's a person in your life that causes you to sin. You're supposed to cut those things and those people out of your life, which means get rid of them. Don't do them or associate with things like that anymore. Now, I'm not going to go into, is music bad or is TV shows bad and which ones it is, because I'm just not going to go in. That's another thing for another day. But basically, Jesus was using metaphors. He wasn't telling you to literally go out and do that. He was saying it's better to do that. He was basically telling about how severe hell is. So if something in your life does cause you to sin, you gouge it out. You cut it out of your life. And as for the millstone thing, what Jesus was talking about is if you cause someone else, one of the little ones who believe in you, to sin. God takes that very seriously. They'll still pay for their sin, but you will suffer worse because you caused them to sin. So that's another severe thing Jesus was comparing to, and how you should cut that out of your life. As for little kids discovering themselves, that's just something kids do. There's just nothing wrong with a little kid discovering parts of their bodies. Alright, now let's get on to the next point.
Spree. Jesus was a forgiving man, a tolerant man, and a mild-tempered man. Unless you start selling stuff in his dad's house, then that boy will straight up whip you. At the time of the Jewish Passover, Jesus went to Jerusalem's temple courts only to discover that moneylenders and animal sellers were operating within. In John 2, he was said to have made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. Does that sound a little weird to you, or is it just me? Admittedly, these sellers were taking advantage of foreign worshippers who needed animals in local currency, and they were doing it in a place of worship. So Jazzy C's anger is entirely understandable. But did he really need to throw tables over and start whipping people? Who does he think he is? R. Kelly? Number 3, he...
Okay, first off, I'm just going to point out, nowhere does it says that Jesus actually whipped people. It just says he just drove them out. What he could have been doing is lashing the cords at the people, and the people just ran. But think about this for a moment. Jesus was God's son, God incarnate. These people were basically overcharging for the stuff they were selling, the doves and the other stuff that was used for sacrifices. And those are the things people need to sacrifice to their gods, so that they could be forgiven for any sins they committed. This was God's house, and Jesus being the Son of God, well, understandably it made him angry. He wanted that stuff out. And, I mean, if you saw someone doing something that was unethical in your house, wouldn't you get angry? I mean, I'm sure some people wouldn't, might not, especially if money was involved, because they'd want to profit off the money. But that's besides the point. The point is that was God's house, and Jesus being God's son, it just made him angry. He wanted those people out, so he drove them out. I mean, it's perfectly understandable, and nowhere does it say that he hurt anyone. I mean, yeah, he threw over tables that were selling doves, told them to get the doves out of there, and made a cord out of whips to drive people away. But there's nowhere in there does it say that Jesus actually whipped people. So there's no evidence of him hurting anyone in it. Alright, let's get to the next point.
Pokes your wounds. Jesus considered himself a faith healer. If he touched you and you were blind, the miracle of sight would be yours. If you had leprosy, bam, a quick fondle from Jesus and you're good. But if these tales were based on real-life events, then that means the guy Jesus was based on went around stroking sick people in places they didn't want to be stroked. Healing the ear of the servant is one of Jesus' most famous miracles, when a man known as Malchus had his ear sliced off by one of J. Fresh's followers. Jesus obviously felt bad that one of his crew had represented him in such a whack manner. So to make amends, he touched the man's ear stump and healed his wound. Apparently. I wonder how that went down, though. Because out of all the Gospels which record this incident, only Luke claims the ear was healed. Basically what happened is that Jesus saw someone's severed ear and thought, cool, I want to touch that. So he did, and then made up a healing excuse to get himself out of it. This is probably what happened with the lepers, the crippled, the blind man, and the withered hand guy, too. I guess Jesus just loved to touch gross people. Number 2, never had dinner with...
Alright. So yeah, you're saying Jesus touched gross people in apparent ways they didn't want to be touched. First off, nowhere does it say that Jesus touched these people in places they didn't want to be touched, like you're getting at in certain unwanted places. Second of all, who really would care? If you were blind since birth or had a disease like leprosy, would you really care if someone healed you from that? You know, you could be normal. I have bad eyes and I'm crippled on my right side, so I'll never be able to do stuff like driving. Now, my case isn't as bad as some people, and I'm not as limited as most crippled people are, but still, I wouldn't complain, because the worst part about this is I'll never be able to drive. My whole life I'll have to depend on other people to take me places. If I could be healed and could be able to drive, I wouldn't complain, and I'm sure no one else would either. And as for Luke being the only gospel, the Gospels were from 4 different people and from their point of view of how they saw and heard about things. It's like this. Say you and your friends saw a guy wearing a red shirt with white stripes. One of you might say, I saw the guy wearing a red shirt. The other one might say, I saw the guy wearing a shirt with stripes. And you might say, I saw the guy wearing a shirt with white stripes. It was from different people's point of view and on how they viewed Jesus doing these things. Yeah, only Luke said his ear was healed, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It was only Luke that mentioned it. So, yeah, I mean, if you're being healed, why would you really care? I mean, if you're blind all your life and you can finally see, or you're being cured from leprosy, which is a very bad disease that calls for isolation or being put in a community with other people like you, then what's exactly the problem of him laying his hands on you? All right, now let's get to the next point.
Family. Jesus' old man was absent for much of his life. When he was around, he was downright abusive. If I let a bunch of strangers murder my kid and throw his corpse into a cave, you better believe I'm losing custody. It's one rule for God and another for the rest of us. With that in mind, it makes sense as to why Jesus wasn't a fan of family dinners. But according to Luke 14, he also hated having friends around or even mild acquaintances, and he believed that everyone should follow his lead on this. According to GZC, the only reason people invite friends, relatives, or neighbors over for dinner is because they think they'll return the favor. Instead, he believed his followers should invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind over for some chow, because they cannot repay you, and you will instead be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So, let's get this straight. The only reason he's having hobos and cripples round for lunch is so he can eventually become a zombie. That's totally not woke, Jesus. Number 1, he spat on.
Alright, I do see what he's getting at here. I'm not going to mention the whole God let his son be murdered thing, because I explain that in my lessons. I talk about all that. But, again, metaphorical. The point Jesus was making when he said this was, don't do things so you can get gratitude for it, because if you hold a dinner and invite your family, you know, they're all going to thank you or maybe want to return the favor. And therefore you receive your reward. But do things that people can't repay you back for. And that way you will receive your reward in heaven. Now, it's not to say to disclude your family out of things. Yeah, I know he says that, but the point he's making is to do things out of humility. To just do things where you can't get rewarded for it, because crippled and poor people can't reward you back. So you do things that you can't get rewards here on this earth for you, so you'll get rewards here in heaven, and those will be so much better. But yeah, still invite your family over for dinner, but just try not to take too much gratitude in it, or try not to accept rewards for it, one or the other. don't let your right hand know. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so to speak, in the scriptures. All right, let's get to the last point.
Blind people. Is it any wonder that the second coming of Christ hasn't happened yet if he's going to poke levers and spit at the blind when he gets here? We'd kick his ass in a second. But yes, I'm afraid this story is true. Jesus did genuinely spit at blind people. He gobbed one up, savored the flavor, and hocked a loogie right in the eyes of those who could not see. He was also known to spit on the ground so he could mix his spit with mud, before mixing this concoction and rubbing that in blind folks' eyes too. That's nasty, Jesus. Why would you do that? Well, to be fair to J. Cry, this wasn't considered a particularly weird thing to do at the time. Old-timey doctors had a tradition of spitting on their patients, and it is only recently that spitting in general has become unacceptable. The Maasai tribes of Africa even spit at each other today as a formal greeting. So I guess this is one weird thing we can let Jesus off the hook for. Except, not really. Because remember, Jesus claimed he could heal people with a touch of his hand. So if that's the case, then what's all the spitting for? Perhaps we'll find out if we investigate fewer myths and more about the man himself, which is what we've done in our bonus video, The Real Jesus, which you can watch on our Patreon page at patreon.com/.
Alright, first, as to that next video, I won't be watching that because I'm not going to subscribe to their Patreon. But first thing is, you just admitted that was a thing people did back then. So, yeah. Besides, it never said he spat on them. It said he rubbed the saliva in their eyes, and then they would be able to see. Yeah, I get it. He was a faith healer, but Jesus just had ways of doing things. And again, a lot of times they asked him, Lord, I want to see. So Jesus did what they asked him. What does it matter if you're being healed? And it's not like Jesus did any physical harm to them. So what does it matter if you, who were blind, cannot see? And I had eye surgery when I was like 13 and was blind for the rest of the evening. That was not fun, okay? My mom had to feed me. I know blind people can learn ways to feed themselves, but if I hated it just for one evening, imagine how people their whole lives go about being blind. I know your other senses compensate for stuff, but still, if you could see just like everyone else, wouldn't you take it? So, I mean, again, who cares? If you're being healed, what does it matter? In closing, honestly, I think they just took the scriptures way too out of context and just misrepresented everything and was basically disrespectful. That is my rebuttal, and I'm sure this probably still doesn't convince a lot of people. But this is just what I think. I just had to make a video response to this, and I know this is not an exactly new video, but I just had to make a response to this because I just found this all wrong. This channel does have some very good videos on it that I have enjoyed, and like I said, they have a cool intro. But I mean, guys, I don't know. It just didn't sit right with me. Anyway, thank you for tuning in, and I'm sorry if the video was a little loud. I guess it's the software I'm using. I really can't afford to get better software at this time. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this video. So God bless everyone. Happy New Year. Steven out.